Hi guys, ever since the new Sony ZV-E1 was announced, a lot of people have been asking me to compare it to the A7C, so that is what I'm going to do. After all, they look pretty similar. They're somewhere near each other in price, so which one should you get? Let's talk about it. So first, let's talk about the fabulous A7C and its advantages over the ZV-E1. And it does have some advantages, even though it's a 3-year-old camera, still a great camera, and it has some benefits that you're not going to get with the ZV-E1. So let's start with an obvious one, and that is the viewfinder, the electronic viewfinder. This is my A7 III right here. So the viewfinder, the thing you look through, it has a 2.36 million dot EVF on the A7C. There is a 0 dot EVF on the ZV-E1. It doesn't have one. So if you're out on a bright sunny day, that's it. You got to look at the screen, which is not a great screen. We'll get to that in a minute. But, you know, that's all you have. It's nice to have that viewfinder, especially when you want to take photos. Speaking of photos, you can take photos with that fantastic 24 megapixel sensor. So the ZV-E1 only has a 12 megapixel sensor. So if you're going to be printing large or you're going to be doing a lot of cropping, then the A7C is the way to go for photos. And not just because of the megapixel count, but also because of mechanical shutter. The A7C has a mechanical shutter, the ZV-E1 does not. So if you're in a place where there's a lot of different LED lights, they're blinking different ways, and sometimes you just can't help it. You're going to get banding and you're going to get flicker in your images. Also very fast moving objects. You may see some bending in a golf swing, let's say, whereas a mechanical shutter is going to solve all that. And that 24 megapixel sensor has another benefit for the A7C, and that is APS-C crop mode. You can go into APS-C crop mode. You can use APS-C lenses in that mode, or you can do it with your full frame lenses, and it will just crop in 1.5 times, and you will still get in photos, you'll still get 10 megapixels, which is pretty close to the ZV-E1's 12 megapixels. And but also in 4K video, I find it has the real benefit. You're still going to get full 4K sharp video downsampled from that 6K sensor. So I find having an APS-C mode on my full frame cameras is great. Like this is an FX30, that is a ZV-E10. I have a bunch of full frame cameras, so I like to be able to just put my lenses, whichever lens I have will fit on my camera, and I don't have to worry about it. If it's an APS-C lens, it goes on my full frame into APS-C crop mode. Now the ZV-E1, in order to use an APS-C lens, you have to do the clear image zoom, which is still a digital zoom and a smart upscale, so you will be losing resolution. I would much rather have it, you know, in APS-C mode and have 10 megapixel photos and also 4K video. And the 4K video is actually sharper on the A7C because, as I mentioned, 6K sensor downsampled to 4K. The 12 megapixel sensor is more of a 1-to-1 readout on the A7S III sensor, FX3 sensor, FX6 sensor as well. It's a big selling point for the ZV-E1. And that image is fantastic. But if you're looking at sharpness alone, the image coming out of the A7C is going to be sharper. Not necessarily better, but sharper. It also has a better build quality. It's all that magnesium alloy. The A7C feels very solid. It's a very nice camera to hold, I find, and it's just rugged. It feels tough, like a little brick, and I really like that. Having the ZV-E1, well, this one is the ZV-E10, but I know the materials in the ZV-E1, and they're definitely far more plasticky. It doesn't feel the same. It's not as solid. The A7C is going to feel better and be a tougher camera in general. For instance, weather sealing. It has full weather sealing on the A7C, whereas the ZV-E1 is just going to be dust and moisture resistant. So if you're out in the elements, if you want a rugged camera that can withstand the elements, A7C. The overheating. The A7C has been very good at overheating. I have never had overheating issues with an A7 III or an A7C, no matter how long I record. I mean, now it's not doing any of the big high frame rates, so that might be why it doesn't overheat, and it's got that nice magnesium alloy body. But the fact is, if you're going to be shooting for long periods of time, then the A7C is going to be a safer bet. And of course, it's cheaper. It is $1,800 new compared to $2,200 new, but hopefully you could get a sale. I've seen it as low as $1,600 coming from Sony, and if you buy it used, maybe you could get it for $1,300, $1,400. And when you're talking about a $1,400 versus $2,200, that would be a huge savings. But at full retail price, it is $400 cheaper, which is nothing to sneeze at. So what about the advantages of the fancy ZV-E1? Well, the first one I'm going to talk about is 10-bit. 10-bit 422. That is a big deal to me because you get to use your S-Log3. You're going to have so much more dynamic range when you're doing that. With the 8-bit cameras like the A7C, you don't want to really use the log profiles. You can use HLG3 probably, or the Cine 2 profile is pretty good for grading, but you're going to get so much more color information with those 10-bit files. And since I like to grade the S-Log3 footage, to me, that's a big deal. Got the 4K 60, no crop even, and there's no 4K 60 at all on the A7C, so this is doubly good. You get a 4K 60 with no crop at all, obviously major benefit. Another benefit, I'm going to put an asterisk by this because it is only, what is it? It is April 5th, 2023. They haven't released the update yet where they are putting the 4K 120 into the world, but it's going to have 4K 120 at a 10% crop. Don't know how long that's going to last. They say to be safe, the 4K 60, you should only shoot about 30 minutes. Some people are reporting they get more. Some people are reporting they get less. So I can't imagine the 4K 120 is going to be recommended shooting more than 30 minutes, but normally people do 4K 120 in very short bursts, so the overheating may never be an issue for you with 4K 120, and it's neither here nor there because the A7C doesn't have 4K 120 at all. Extreme low light. Now, I'm careful to say extreme low light because the A7C is going to compete with the ZV-E1 in low light right up to about 12,800 ISO. Now, at 12,800, that dual native ISO sensor will kick in the ZV-E1, and then that's just going to run away with the low light performance. But right up until then, you're going to be fine with the A7C. It's going to be very comparable to the ZV-E1. So unless you need those extremes, then the A7C is going to be great in low light. It's great in low light. The ZV-E1 inherits the A7R5's autofocus system, and that's really great. It has that AI chip, so it ups the autofocus game. The autofocus in the A7C, fantastic, but there's just more options, the way you can track is so much smarter, and it tracks more subjects and objects and humans and birds and trains and planes and automobiles and lots of things. It has more tracking and autofocus options. Rolling shutter. The ZV-E1 has much better rolling shutter than the A7C. So if you're doing fast moving things going across your screen, say you're filming going out a car window, you're doing whips and pans, the ZV-E1 is just absolutely fantastic because it has the A7S III sensor. It is so great, whereas you're going to see the jello and the wobble with the A7C when you're moving the camera around. So if rolling shutter is a major concern, then the ZV-E1 definitely better. The stabilization is going to be a lot better on the ZV-E1, and that's because it has active stabilization, first of all. The A7C has 5-axis in-body image stabilization, but it doesn't do that active Sony stabilization, and that is much better. The A7 IV's active stabilization, active steady shot, it looks a lot better than the A7C or the A7 III's stabilization alone, and then the ZV-E1, that ups it again and does dynamic stabilization. So dynamic, active, steady shot, which is going to use those smart clear image zoom features and crop in a little bit and keep your footage extra stable. So it's nice to have all of that extra stability. So basically, if you're going to be hand-holding without a gimbal, then the ZV-E1 is definitely going to look a lot better than the A7C. With the fancy AI chip and that clear image zooming, they can do a lot of fun things with it, like the framing feature and the tracking feature. The auto framing feature where it can act like a cameraman that's following you around as you move about the frame, and then the tracking one where you can keep an object at a certain portion in the frame and the camera will crop in a little bit to try to keep that object where you put it. Those are cool little features. I'm not sure how well they'll work in the real world. We're going to have to test that out and see if that's something people would use. But for the target audience, the vloggers, the people doing casual video, this might be a trick that a lot of people like. It has a cool little time-lapse feature. My Panasonic cameras have this, and I love it very much, where you do a time-lapse and then it makes the video for you. And it's not the S&Q mode. It actually just takes the pictures, compiles them for you, and spits out a 4K time-lapse. And that is such a time saver. Instead of having to take all of the individual photos, bring them into Lightroom, make your own time-lapse, things like that. I love that feature, and I'm going to use it a ton. It's got the product showcase mode, of course, because this is targeted at content creators, and often we show things to the camera or displaying products all the time. When I get the ZV-E1 in, I will display the ZV-E1. I'll have to use the ZV-E10's product showcase mode to do that, but I find that to be a useful feature. You can set up like a center zone autofocus and turn all your settings up on bust on the A7C, and it will sort of work like that, but you got to dig through the menus, and then to get back to your eye autofocus, you got to dig back through the menus. You can't set it up with one touch. I like the product showcase mode. Something else I like is the updated menus. It has Sony's new updated system. The A7C has the older, clunkier menus, which I am personally used to. I can fly through them now because I'm so used to it, but for a new user, they're definitely going to like the new menu system, and everybody likes a menu system that you can touch. It has a full touch screen on the ZV-E1, whereas the A7C has that antiquated thing where you just have to use the buttons. You can only touch to focus or touch to track. You can't actually manipulate the menu with your finger. A lot of people are surprised when they pick up one of the older Sony cameras. They're like, what is happening with the screen? And the ZV-E1 screen actually has more swipe and gesture features than any other Sony screen that's ever been out. So nice that you can change the settings right there from the screen, and it has that full touch menu. And the screen itself is better. Neither screen is good enough, in my opinion, for the price that you are paying, but the ZV-E1 screen is definitely going to be better. It's 1.04 million dots versus the 922,000 dots of the A7C. However, the A7C does have that EVF you can fall back on. You can load LUTs right onto the ZV-E1, and that is fantastic, especially using that 10-bit, using those S-Log3. I can look at my footage instead of looking at a gray washed out screen. I can see how my image is going to look in post, putting on the LUT that I will put on in editing. It's got a much better internal mic. I would always suggest using an external mic like a lav or a boom. However, if you're just going to use the camera itself, the capsule on the ZV-E1 much better, and it can be dynamic. It'll capture things in front, behind, or it can do it automatically for you. It comes with that little Don King wig, that little windscreen, and those really, really help cut down the wind noise. So it is usable without a microphone at all, whereas the A7C is not usable unless you get an external mic. Better 1080 footage. The 1080 footage coming off the A7S III sensor, which the ZV-E1 has, is quite nice, whereas the 1080 on the A7C is pretty soft. The 4K looks great, but the 1080 is not the greatest 1080 in the world. If you want to do a lot of 1080 shooting, then ZV-E1 is definitely better. Streaming, you can do up to 4K 30 streaming on the ZV-E1. I'll put another asterisk here because you probably won't be able to do that for a long period of time. Small bursts will be okay, but a long period of time, you're probably going to run into some overheating issues, so I would bump that down to 1080, which I just said is quite nice coming out of the ZV-E1. Now, you can stream directly from the A7C as well, but it's only in 720. So you'll want a little capture card device to put it up to 1080 or 4K, and then you can just do it like that. And some of those devices are very, very affordable these days, but still, straight from the camera is much better on the ZV-E1. Now, we do have to address the fact that there may be an A7C II coming up at some point in life. I've heard nothing. Sony certainly doesn't talk to me. Most people don't talk to me, but they updated the A7 III and have the A7 IV, so it stands to reason they might update the A7C, make it A7C II. Of course, that would be much more expensive. I'm assuming somewhere around $2,500, if logic prevails, and that'll be a much different conversation because you imagine that would have a lot more features in it than the A7C. So I think you have to look at the A7C as more of an all-rounder camera that has a good value proposition. So it's just a nice, tough little body, reliable camera. It's going to be able to take great photos, going to be able to take great video. It's not going to have some of the new fancier features, but a lot of people don't need those new fancier features, and you might get it at a much lower price point. It's already $400 cheaper. If they get a sale, you might get it $600 cheaper. If you get it used secondhand, who knows? You might get it for, $900 cheaper, maybe $1,000 cheaper. That is a big deal for a camera that is going to still spit out fantastic photos and videos. Of course, if you want all the fancy things and the bells and the whistles and the 4K 120, just on paper alone, certainly the ZV-E1 has far better video specs than the A7C. But it's up to you to decide, are those the video specs that you need in your life? Anyway, thanks for being in my life and watching. Hear that segue? It was terrible. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.